The Washington Talking Book and Braille Library is working to ensure equitable access to reading for everyone. You can help by donating your car, truck, or boat. It's free and easy. Go to careasy.org/WTBBL.
Hello and welcome to Literary Notes, a podcast by the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta. I've got a pretty interesting interview from the Radio Reading Service archives today. The late Nora Ephron was a journalist, playwright, filmmaker, and occasional author. Getting her start writing for the New York Post, she eventually found success as a screenwriter, going on to write and direct movies like When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, and You've Got Mail. She stopped by our studios back in 2010 to discuss her then latest book, I Remember Nothing, and Other Reflections, a characteristically witty and lighthearted memoir about growing older. Here's her conversation with library volunteer Heidi Lang.
Hi, Nora. Welcome to Seattle.
Thank you, Heidi.
So why don't we start off just with the name of the book, I Remember Nothing.
I remember nothing.
Yeah,
I say it 4 times a week. 4 times a week I realize, to my horror, that I have met the person I can't remember the name of, that I've actually had dinner with them, that I possibly took a cruise with them, that perhaps I even dated them. It's one of the things about getting older. And of course, it's not Alzheimer's. At least I don't think it is.
Diagnosable.
Because once I went to buy a book I had read about Alzheimer's and forgot the name of it as I was buying it. And I thought, well, I actually thought it was funny because it was 20 years ago. Now I don't know how funny I would think it was, but I would definitely think this is what it is. This is one of the things of getting older. And as much as, when you're with your friends, this thing that happens when you can't think of the name of the movie, the one about Klaus von Bülow, you can remember that part of it. You can remember Jeremy Irons was in it, and you cannot get the movie to save your soul. And everyone at the table is smacking their heads and snapping their fingers, hoping that it is going to miraculously arrive somewhere in your brain. But it doesn't.
And these days, though, we have technology.
We have technology, we have Google, and because of Google, we can masquerade as people who are at least technologically able to use a mobile device. We can, for a minute hope that people don't think we're geezers, even though we're kind of having a geezer moment. Thank God for Google. I used to think, 6 or 7 years ago, that eventually rich people would have a person in their home called a Google. And as these moments came up, you would turn to the Google, and the Google would go into the other room and Google it and come back with the answer. It never crossed my mind, just such a short time ago, that you'd be able to pull the Google out of your pocket and do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Things are moving very swiftly.
I think a lot of us can relate to growing older, and I wonder if being in the industry you're in, especially in the Hollywood world and entertainment, if growing older is even more difficult or challenging.
I think that there are many, many businesses that are not really user-friendly when it comes to older people. Mm-hmm. I think that's the truth about life. And if you're lucky enough to still be working at a certain point in any business, that's great. But Hollywood, I think one of the reasons I started directing the scripts I wrote was just that I thought, if I don't direct my own scripts, no one will hire me to write them. It was almost more true of writers than directors.
Really?
That you felt, just kind of, you looked around and watched people being washed out of the industry because they weren't young enough. And somebody actually said that to me on a script when I was about to direct my first movie, I had written a script with my sister, and I did not think I was old. And by the way, I wasn't as far as I was concerned. I mean, or almost as far as anyone was concerned. I was still in my 40s. So that was like youth. And a guy in the business said to me, "How would you feel about our bringing in a younger, hipper writer on this project?" I couldn't believe he would even say that. It was practically actionable.
Mm-hmm.
And second of all, I had no idea that I was thought of at that moment as being old.
Yeah. It just sounds very stressful.
Yeah. Yes. Well.
Yeah. Actually, I was hoping you could read one of your short little essays here.
This is from the piece in the book called "I Remember Nothing." It's a section about some of the many things I have forgotten, which, by the way, include not recognizing my own sister. I marched on Washington to protest the war in Vietnam. This was in 1967, and it was the most significant event of the anti-war movement. Thousands and thousands of people were there. I went with a lawyer I was dating. We spent most of the day in a hotel room having sex. I am not proud of this, but I mention it because it explains why I honestly cannot remember anything about the protest, including whether I ever even got to the Pentagon. I don't think I did. I don't think I've ever been to the Pentagon, but I wouldn't bet a nickel on it one way or the other. Norman Mailer wrote an entire book about this march called The Armies of the Night. It was 288 pages long. It won the Pulitzer Prize, and I can barely write 2 paragraphs about it. If you knew Norman Mailer and me and were asked to guess which of us cared more about sex, you would, of course, pick Norman Mailer. How wrong you would be.
I just love how open you are and vulnerable. I mean, you read the book and you feel like, I know her. I wanted to go back to, I think it's the next section where you talk about your start in journalism and getting out of college and starting to work in Newsweek and what that was like being a young woman at Newsweek, what the environment was like.
Well, it was actually sort of fun in that I had a job. That was a good thing. I had a job in the field I had wanted to be in for half my life at that point. I was obsessed with becoming a journalist, and I wasn't a journalist by any means. I was a male girl, and it couldn't have been a more ridiculously lowly occupation for someone who'd gone to college. But I was at least in the business of journalism, and you can survive for quite a while in a low-level job if you're somewhere that's kind of interesting where you haven't been and you're soaking things up like a sponge when you're young. And then I became a clipper. Of course, I wanted to be a writer, but they had told me point blank that they didn't have writers who were women at Newsweek. Another sentence that no one would ever dare utter today, but they said it and they felt it and they believed it, even though, interestingly, there was a woman writing at Newsweek.
She was just the exception?
Well, she wasn't the exception. She had kind of slipped in during World War II, like Rosie the Riveter, and they were never making that mistake again. You know, the war was over, and they'd had to hire women during the war. There was no one else to hire, but that was it. It was over. And, you know, I just thought at the time, you know, obviously if someone said that to you today, you would say, you've got to be kidding. But at the time, I just thought, okay, you know, still it's going to be a job.
Yeah, a lot of people would really kill for that right now.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit your trajectory then. You went from Newsweek, then you did start writing.
I was at Newsweek. I became a researcher, which was another job that only women had. The men were writers, and the women checked what they wrote. And I had been there about 7 months when the New York newspaper strike of 1962 began. It wasn't really a strike, it was a lockout. And all 7 newspapers in New York shut down. A friend of mine named Victor Navasky, who became the famous publisher of The Nation magazine, got some money, $10,000, to do parodies of the New York newspapers. And he got us all to write part of this parody. And it was really funny. And the editors of the New York Post saw it and wanted to sue. And the publisher of the Post, Dorothy Schiff, said, "Don't be ridiculous. If they can parody the Post, they can write for it. Hire them." And I was offered a tryout at the New York Post, which was then, among the 7 newspapers, the 7th, the lowest circulation. But it had a kind of niche. It was a magazine for liberals. It was a magazine that people bought kind of year in and year out. Its 300,000 readers were loyal to it. It had a small staff and a lot of women, probably more women working there than at any other newspaper, probably at all the other 6 combined. They loved women. They had had a kind of sob sister tradition, and they hired me and basically taught me how to write a newspaper article. I thought I had known. Needless to say, I thought I knew, but I didn't know anything.
Do you have any particular mentors or people that stand out?
There were people there who really, really took care of me. An editor named Stan Opatowski and an editor named Joe Rabinovich and a copy editor named Fred McMorrow, and they were great. I would watch them put pencils through what I thought were my brilliant sentences, and they were right. I have a great love of editors as a result of that. It's one of the things that is difficult when you write for the internet, which I do. I do write on Huffington Post. You don't get edited in the way you do it in newspaper. You don't have someone saying, "Are you sure you need this sentence? Aren't you repeating yourself here? Didn't you already say that?" All the things that you learn to do.
Mm-hmm.
So
I was going to ask about that. The shift now that's happening with everything moving to the internet, and it sounds like you're kind of embracing that and working with it. Do you have any fears about the industry in general? And as things, you hear about like papers shutting down.
Well, yes, of course I do. I mean, it's not just that papers are shutting down. It's that the papers that are surviving are cutting back. So there are fewer reporters. There are fewer reporters who are able to go out and do the kind of long investigative pieces that some of these newspapers really were very good at. The LA Times has made just tragic cutbacks in the last couple of years, ever since they were bought by this billionaire who was supposed to be their savior and instead turns out just to be another stupid billionaire. So yes, I'm very concerned about it.
Yeah. Do you miss that part of your work, the going out and being a reporter? And
well, if I
journalism?
really missed it, I could go out and do it.
Yeah.
You still do a certain amount of it when when I wrote Julie and Julia, I felt that I did a certain amount of reporting. It was based on something that had happened. I had a lot of research to do. I talked to a lot of people who had known both the women involved. And so it isn't that you stop using your reporting skills when you're working in other fields.
Kind of just apply them in a different way.
Yes, when Alice Arlen and I wrote Silkwood, we went to Oklahoma. We went through all the courthouse papers. We met the surviving boyfriend.
Right. That's fascinating. So you something I had no idea about you. You had an internship at the White House.
Oh yes, I did have an internship at the White House.
What was that? What was that like?
Well, it was very tragic. It was because I was a Wellesley College political intern, and I had a great job, in quotes. And I worked in Pierre Salinger's office. He was the press secretary to President Kennedy. And I wanted to be a journalist, and I was a political science major, so it was some kind of dream come true. And of course, they had nothing for me to do, and not even a desk. To make matters worse, I think I was the only young woman who worked in the White House that the president didn't make a pass at. That's something that has always hurt my feelings very badly. But I wrote about it because these women kept revealing themselves to have had affairs with him, one after another. And finally, an intern revealed herself And I thought, well, that just does it. I'm going to tell my story. Of course, I have no story, but I told it anyway.
And you did meet him, correct?
I met him. I met him a couple of times. The first time we said hello, and that's probably the moment he decided we weren't going to have an affair. But, I had a really bad permanent wave, so whatever. But then, about 4 weeks later, I was standing out behind the White House on a Friday afternoon, and the helicopter was coming, as it always did on Fridays, to take him to Hyannisport. And since I had nothing else to do, I was standing out there watching. To my surprise, he turned out to be in the Oval Office right behind me. And he came out the door, and the helicopter blades were whirling, whirling, whirling. It was unbelievably noisy. You couldn't hear anything. He turned around and saw me and said, over the noise of the helicopters, "How are you coming along?" And I said, "What?" And he then got into the helicopter and left. And that was it. That was the sum total of my relationship with Jack. Yeah.
So you brought up your permanent wave there, and in another section of the book, you talk about aging. You describe something you call an Aruba.
Oh, my
which
poor Aruba.
Just made me laugh.
Oh, yeah.
What
well,
is
it wouldn't
an
make you
Aruba?
laugh if you were my age. It would not make you laugh. An Aruba, this is an original word for it. The Aruba, it's named after that island in the Caribbean where there are very strong trade winds, so all the trees are blown sideways. And that is the name I have chosen for this thing that happens to women when they get into their 60s, which is that suddenly they have this tiny, tiny little, there's no other expression for it but bald spot, right on the crown of their heads. It's where all the cowlicks are just blown sideways. And if you catch it in the morning, if you fix it in the morning and you leave your house, within 1 minute, it is back again because just the slightest gust of wind blows your hair sideways and you have it. And you spend the day sort of stroking your head, hoping that you're covering it up and that no one can see it, because it is just mortifying if you come home and catch a glimpse of yourself in the rear view mirror and realize that it's been there all day and no one has told you. Now, of course, no one can tell you because there's no word for it, but now there is. You see,
Yes.
an Aruba. So if you ever see me with an Aruba, tell me, fix your Aruba.
I love that because it really does. The minute you describe that, I'm like, I know just what she's talking
Yeah,
about.
oh man. This is the thing that no one tells you about getting older. People are constantly writing books about your happy golden years, and they really don't say any of the truthful things. The Aruba is, of course, one of the least of them, but it is still very irritating. It doesn't compare to the really bad part about it getting older, which is about people getting sick and dying. But on the list of trivial things that bother you about old age, like your sagging elbows and your Aruba, there it is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I noticed in the book you make just a couple of politically tinged comments or mention the war in Iraq, and I just wondered personally for you if you would have liked to have more of that in the book, if that's something you think about, like I don't want it to be a political book or don't want to turn off certain readers, or kind of what goes into that
No,
thinking.
it's not really a book. It's a memoir, and I referred to the war in Iraq because I was so horrified by it. I want to say I wasn't one of those people who was fooled, because I work at home. I do everything I possibly can to avoid working, and that included watching all the testimony in front of the UN about the, quote, weapons of mass destruction, unquote, which if you watched those hearings, you knew they hadn't found. So I could not imagine what all my in-the-know friends were thinking when they assured me that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and we knew all about it. You know, it's not really a political book. I wouldn't have any problem in writing that. Well, I wanted to write a memoir before I forgot everything. And I wanted to write another book about the realities of life at a certain point.
Mm-hmm. How is it very different for you writing something so personal, intimate versus a screenplay about fictional characters?
Well, I've always done personal essays. I mean, I haven't always done them, but I've done them since the pieces that became Crazy Salad, which is a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, no.
So one thing that was fascinating to read as being just a spectator and viewer of movies and plays was hearing from your perspective what it's like to actually have a flop, to have something you created not do well. And I wondered if you could share a little bit how that
Well, it was just a
deals.
thing I wanted to write about because it's
No one talks
certainly
about
been,
that.
no one talks about their flops, or if they do, if you occasionally you read about making the most of your failure, how out of failure comes a learning experience.
it's a growth
and
opportunity.
Growth is a big word. And I've had a bunch of flops in my life, and I don't just count the movies. I also, I have friendships that have failed, and I have marriages that have failed. And an interesting thing about them is that they take up a lot more space in your head than the successes do. The successes are just giddy, fabulous, wonderful, wee kinds of things, and you don't really think about them at all. You make a movie that works. You don't spend months trying to figure out what you should have done, who you should have cast, what you should have said no to, all the things that happen when a movie doesn't work. And if a marriage fails, you certainly spend months and months thinking, how could I not have known, and what was wrong with me, and why didn't I get out sooner, or why did this happen at all, and what could I have done to prevent it? All those things that torture you. So I just thought it would be interesting to write about flops and to say one thing I actually believe, which is that the main lesson you learn from a failure is that it's entirely possible you could have another failure. That's about the lesson you learn. The lesson you want to learn, which is that how to never have another one, you don't quite learn, because that would mean that everyone who had ever failed would then succeed forever. You don't want to learn a bad lesson from it, which is to not take a chance again and not to put yourself out there. That would be terrible. Some people do learn that lesson, though. And I have lots of friends in the movie business and in the book business who sort of let failure affect them in very, very clear ways. They kind of stopped doing the daring thing, or they just stopped doing.
Mm-hmm.
And not because no one would hire them, because the experience is, who are we kidding,
how
no
painful.
fun.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
New York City is almost like another character in your work, and you were, I think you were born in New York City, but it sounds like you were raised in California.
I was born in New York City. My life was ruined at the age of 5 when I was moved to LA without being asked. And I spent my childhood thinking, I have got to get back there. That was where I belonged. It was the clearest early memory of my life in LA, was thinking that. And I did. I got back as fast as I could. I got to New York the day I graduated from college.
Wow. So you must still have to go to LA.
Oh yeah, I like
often.
LA fine. It's just not. It's
Not
just
home.
not home. Yeah, exactly.
So growing up, your parents were writers themselves. They were in the industry, is that right?
They were screenwriters.
Screenwriters, okay. And there was a great section in the book, a legend of your mom with Lillian Ross.
Yes.
Yes. What was it that your mom...
Well, my mother told us that she had thrown Lillian Ross out of our house because Lillian Ross, who was a famous young New Yorker writer, had come for dinner and had seen a picture of me and my 3 sisters and said to my mother, "Are these your children?" And my mother said yes. And Lillian Ross said, "Do you ever see them?" And my mother said that she told Lillian Ross to leave at that very moment. And this was the story we grew up on that we just thought was the most fantastically exciting cowboy story about our mother. And then years passed, and my mother really became terrible alcoholic, and I got older and read Lillian Ross, who I thought was just a fantastic writer, and I thought, oh, did this really happen? Did this really happen? And then I met Lillian Ross, and that story is in the book, and you find out, well, at least I found out what the truth of it was.
Yeah, that was a great story. So is there anything you would offer in our last few minutes as advice for aspiring writers, screenwriters, especially women in the industry today?
Screenwriters, I have no idea. No, I don't really. I mean, I don't. I was at a thing last night where a young man stood up and asked for some advice as a screenwriter because he was in film school and he was having trouble writing a screenplay, a whole screenplay. And I was completely horrified that at the age of 22, he was being asked to write a screenplay. I said, well, why don't you just write a short? Why don't you try to write 4 scenes that tell a story? You know, I don't think there's any reason why young people should necessarily be able to do the thing that they would someday like to do. Writing a screenplay is hard. You wouldn't expect anyone at the age of 21 who wanted to write fiction to write a novel. And by the same token, I don't know why these film schools are asking people to write entire screenplays. Do it slowly. Take it easy. Write little things and try to master the most important thing, which is everything has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's the most important thing.
What are you most excited about now moving forward? Is it your writing for Huffington Post? Do you have anything else you're working on?
I am most excited about the fact that it's the end of the year and I'm going to be doing a lot of cooking. Oh. And the joy of cooking is that unlike writing, it almost always turns out. And if it doesn't, you can do it again and it will definitely turn out.
Yeah, that sounds good. Not much that you can compare with that. Do you have any favorite directors or authors that you're enjoying right now that you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I loved this year. My favorite novel was called A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan, which I think is a masterpiece. And I tell everyone to read it. I've told so many people to read it that finally Jennifer Egan herself heard that I've been telling everyone to read it. So I was very excited because I don't know her, but I think she's a genius. I loved this book.
That was good.
I loved it as much as I loved Olive Kittredge, which was my favorite book of the year before this. And I that's my favorite book this year.
Yeah. Any movies that stand out for you?
This year I loved The Social Network. I thought it was great.
That was good. Well, thank you so much for coming in. Once again, we've been talking to Nora Ephron, author of I Remember Nothing and Other Reflections.
I Remember Nothing and Other Reflections is available in the catalog of the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library as an audiobook with the class ID DB072104. If you have any questions or comments about the library, or to see if you qualify for our services, visit WTBBL.org or call us at 206-615-0400 or toll free at 800-542-0866. This episode of Literary Notes is a production of the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library based in Seattle, Washington. Today's interview was conducted by Heidi Lang. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta. Thanks for listening.
Every story deserves to be heard, and everyone deserves access to it. The Washington Talking Book and Braille Library provides audiobooks, Braille, and reading support for people across the state who can't read standard print. That car, truck, or boat you're not using anymore can help fund those services. Donate your vehicle today. Pickup is free, running or not. Start now at careasy.org/WTBBL.